Integration, has really been viewed as a very technical topic, but I think what I want to leave you with today is really to get you thinking about another way of looking at integration, that it's much more integral to what you're doing as SaaS vendors and developers. So I'm originally from Australia, and my first job out of college was actually working for the prime contractor that was building that submarine, which was pretty cool. Got to go down to periscope depth, the whole thing. But there's a moral to this story as well. I was actually working in a department called integration before I knew it would actually be a thing for the bulk of my career. In the top left, this is actually a giant serial cable. So it had, I don't even remember how many pins, like 64 pins, and all it was doing is really the same thing as the one in the middle, RS-232, if anyone remembers that, which in the end is now, replaced entirely by USB in all its various form factors. It's sort of ironic to talk about USB and usability because I think, even though there's only a 50% chance of getting it wrong, I think I'm at about 75% wrong, getting it upside down. But I think there's an analogy here. This is all about the user experience of integration. On the left, it used to be really hard. In a defense system, it's like enterprise software was at that same era. Everything was built by hand, nothing was commercial off the shelf, and that meant integration was just as hard. But we don't live in that world of software anymore, and integration shouldn't be that way either. So that's really what I'm going to tell you today. And maybe I'm speaking too loud at times, but. Okay, so I think you already know this. Consumerization, I kind of think of that as a made-up word, and I'm going to make up my own word in a few slides' time as well. But let's go with consumerization of enterprise software. It's really about a shift in power. The one that everyone always talks about is the shift from IT to the line of business. Who's actually buying your software these days? I think it's even more than that, though. It's also about the class of business that's buying software. If you wind back the clock, software was bought by enterprises and their IT departments who issued RFPs, and now there's almost like a democratizing effect in what's happened with enterprise software. So this power shift has been driven by you. The ability to try and buy software, freemium models, no install and upgrade issues, no hardware to worry about. In a previous life, really not that long ago, working with a healthcare company as a vendor, we were trying to fix software issues they had, and because they just missed the planning window with their IT department, they couldn't get a slot in a rack somewhere, so they couldn't upgrade, and they had to wait for this massive planning cycle to kind of renew. So that shift has happened. With that shift, because there's now so much power in the hands of lines of business and individual users, it's led to specialization. There's sort of like this, both on the supply side and the demand side, and apps that used to be, well, they weren't even a thing, like collaboration apps or expense reporting, things of that sort, right? So it's led to a lot of specialization, individual tools solving individual problems, and because they do it well, businesses end up with a sort of a best-of-breed approach where best-of-breed for one business is not the same as best-of-breed for another. And what does that leave you with? Well, it leaves you with your customers with an integration problem. So your Lego brick in this is just one of many, and somehow it all needs to fit together. APIs, of course, are a start, but it's not really all that it's about. So consumerization of the enterprise has really, as a sequence here, shifted the power, created a lot of specialization, and therefore a lot of need for integration. So this is a slide from the Kleiner-Perkins annual Internet Trends from about May last year. I guess the new one must be coming out soon. This is about enterprise software as it was in 2000 versus 2017. And if you look at the right-hand column, this is exactly the way that purely like what we used to call Web 2.0, I suppose, consumer apps function as well. They're all cloud-based, subscription-based, if they're charged at all the way down to the way that engagement is measured. So enterprise software has moved in that direction as well. I think you all know that. In terms of an example, I'll just choose one here. First of all, there was not really, collaboration software in this manner, say 10 years ago. But now the way in which a product like Slack begins in an organization, free, with the freemium level, I think 10,000 messages in your history, and you can just keep going from there. It's just completely changed the way that software is bought and deployed and ultimately, rolled out to an enterprise, pocket by pocket. And, I've worked at companies when Salesforce was kind of in its infancy, where individual sales department, even if they were still corporate standard was ACT or Sales Logics, if anyone remembers those, the sales team themselves were, like individual teams were running Salesforce because it was so easy, even if they then had to turn around and report back officially. I see a nodding head. So it's a common experience. Something like Concur, which I always give a shout out to. I have no skin in the game when it comes to Concur at all, but I've never had such a pleasant experience using an enterprise app on a mobile device. It's just incredible. And again, expense reporting, I mean, not the sexiest topic, but just done so extremely well. So that's about the shift in power, the fact that maybe these apps begin in pockets and gradually spread until they sort of begin to dominate and get acquired, I suppose. And where are we? Okay, so all this means, again, with the specialization, the proliferation, that we've gone, even over the last 5 years, from in a SMB, maybe a small and mid-sized business, having maybe only 3 cloud apps on average, to now over 20. We hear, the 100-app enterprise. You'll notice as we went back, if I just go back, there are certain categories that didn't even exist 5 years ago. Like DevOps, I mean, there were things out there for automating deployments and so on, but it wasn't, a term in the way that it is today. It's just, a common category. So all of this somehow needs to work together, though. All these lines don't just happen by accident. So how do you manage all that integration? Consumers, your customers, need these apps to be integrated, right? They want it both ways, actually. They want the freedom to choose whatever app they want, making decisions at, say, a line of business level, not necessarily at the IT level, and somehow expect it all to work together. They're able to deploy it themselves, but they can't always integrate it themselves. So there's sort of, there's this tug of war going on. So the goal should be that integration has to be as simple and intuitive as the app itself. And then that's really the challenge that I started with, that of the user experience for integration. So if we look at the top line here, this is about the journey that led to the consumerization of the enterprise. Way back when, client server, moving to the early days of the web, to SaaS, and now SaaS 2.0, which again is characterized by this complete frictionless ways of working. Meanwhile, on the bottom here, we have a sort of a parallel timeline for integration, and beginning with things like ETL, which is really just about shifting, transforming, and loading data. EAI and the early days of iPaaS beginning in the 2000s. So an iPaaS, or Integration Platform as a Service, is a dedicated cloud platform that helps you integrate. More normally, though, actually what happens is it's your customers or their service providers that are left with the integration problem. So I'm not here to necessarily sell anything other than really the idea. But integration platforms, there are many of them. There seem to be more every time I turn around. So it's by no means a kind of a stable space. I think it's still growing, and it's growing because of SaaS 2.0. Because as more and more apps come about, there's just an increasing demand for integration. So why iPaaS in the first place? So this is from your customer's point of view, an integration platform gives them some advantages, including the ability to more rapidly deal with evolving business needs, dealing with changing APIs. I think over our roundtable at lunch, someone said that APIs change on average every 3 years. So if you have integrations with multiple endpoints or multiple SaaS apps, on average, something's going to be changing much more often than that. The speed, how quickly can you turn things around? How reliable is it? How can you manage and monitor it? Is it secure, and is it going to scale? So your own engineering teams can absolutely solve these problems. But if they do, they're almost having to reinvent an iPaaS themselves. And our advice, again, talking over lunch with other people that are really interested in this space, a lot of the businesses that end up coming to a company like mine, where we're in the integration business, they've first tried and failed to build something themselves. They've used their own precious engineering resources on something that's kind of core. Again, it has to be part of the user experience, but it ends up being much harder than they first thought because of all these things. They're halfway through. They end up building something that maybe works as a version 1, but it doesn't allow them to grow, and they own it. They own it for life. So an integration platform definitely helps your customers as they try to integrate, or other sort of the cottage industry of integration vendors out there. But what about for you as SaaS vendors? And that's what I want to finish with here. I said it at the beginning that customer experience extends now to integration. So here's the word I made up, integratability. I had to fight with the spell check on that one, but I think it sounds better even than consumerization. But it truly is becoming an evaluation criteria. When our customers come to us, they're often in the middle of multiple sales cycles. They're saying, well, I want to buy, let's say, NetSuite as my ERP, but I want to know, can it integrate with some other SaaS app, right? So it's part of the purchase decision. So integratability, there are many aspects to this, but it's about, do you have a way of communicating with the developer community through portals? Are things properly documented? Is there an easy way to onboard? You have to have made a choice about whether you have open APIs, whether you have to pay to get them, whether it's a standard part of the product. Really, the first thing you need as part of this integratability is to ensure that you have a product manager for APIs. That's really fundamental. It occurred to me that I'm not explicitly saying it on the slide, but a lot of the conversation over lunch is really leading all in that direction. But I think you also need product management for integration. So an API is only part of it. That's just like my cable at the beginning of the presentation. It doesn't actually solve the whole problem. So to go back to this, I want to introduce the idea of a next generation of integration platform. So it's not just a toolbox to allow your customers or their service providers to wire things together, but it's something much more than that. And it's really beginning to think of integration as a product. That's why I say integration needs a product manager as well. So if we think about integration as a product and begin to think of integration apps. So imagine sort of adjacent to your core SaaS app, you have an integration app, a fully managed app. It's not like a one and done. It's something that can evolve over time, something that can respond to changes in APIs and be republished, just as you manage your software lifecycles today. It should be licensed to enable, from an integration point of view, to handle things like freemium. You have a freemium offering when it comes to your core app. You have to think of the same types of things when you look at integration as well. And just as the apps that you're building and selling allow your customers to deploy themselves, you need to get to the point where the integration app can be configured by the same business user that made the decision to purchase and has got it up and running. I mean, when was the last time anyone read the Slack user manual, right, for example, right? This is typical now. No one reads the documentation. You need something that a business user can get up and running really easily. So by focusing on integration at that level as an application, that's really the heart of what I mean by iPaaS 2.0. And when you've done that, you want things that are pre-built. So it's not just a sort of a Lego kit. It's more pre-built. So you've gone out and you've thought about how you need to integrate. So if you're in an ecosystem where you have to talk, or your customers are demanding that you integrate with certain hubs, you can go ahead and build in your integration app all the common use cases that you care about, and enable then, when the business user goes to deploy it, they can just configure the things that they need. Deployed in minutes, not in months, as can happen, and easy to configure moving forward. And then built on an iPaaS, because even when you do try to solve your customers' problems when it comes to integrations by bundling things and packaging integrations, you're not always going to cover their use cases. There's going to be outliers. You're going to be in the 80-20, 90-10 range. So how do you deal with the esoteric use cases? And again, we were talking about that over lunch. This is sort of a best of both worlds approach, because it allows you to package what's common while still having an underlying integration platform to deal with things that go outside the lines. So this is the vision of ways in which, or a really meaningful way to improve the user experience when it comes to integration. So to survive, as your apps with their specialties are thrown into the mix with all these other apps and need to integrate, three things to keep in mind: that the shift in power that we've seen and that I talked about at the beginning, say from IT to lines of business, from enterprise to smaller customers, that will happen in integration as well. There's a demand for integration that's as simple as the apps themselves. Just as you're developing specialized tools, there needs to be specialized tools for integrations. You don't want your own engineers developing all this on their own and reinventing the wheels. And there are plenty of iPaaSes out there that have solved these problems already. I'd highly recommend you check them out. And then if you can go the next step and think about integration in terms of an integration app, another SaaS app, then that's really where the best user experience is going to come from. And that will help your customers have a much richer experience with your product, and the better integrated they are, the stickier they become, reducing churn and so on. All right, so that's all we had, and I think we should have a bit of time for questions if there are any. Thank you.
Questions? Any questions? Questions? No? I have a question on the partnership piece of this, because, clearly as we're all in partnerships trying to put these things together, this, an iPaaS solution presumably helps to speed that along. I guess, how do you recommend, or how would you recommend like a business development person put the business case together for the product team on why they should implement the iPaaS?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to, as always, product working together with business development. it's yet another investment choice that needs to be made. And in a way, I don't think it's any different than anything else. You have only so many resources to play with. And it's a matter then of being able to quantify the opportunity, what sort of competition is out there. So in that respect, I don't think it's any different. I think so from a partner point of view, though, I think let's say when selecting an iPaaS as well, that it has to be looked at in terms of, breadth of connectivity is obviously a big one, other existing relationships in place, and then, just ease of use overall, both for the development of integration, but then maintaining it going forward while looking at it through the lens of the ultimate user experience that you're delivering.
Yeah. So. Thanks. Any other questions? No, we good? All right. Thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you.